Chapter 3. Helen awoke to the rich aroma of coffee. For a moment, blinking against the morning light, she couldn't understand who might be making coffee in her lonely apartment. But then, in a rush, the memories of the previous evening returned, and with them a sensation of uncontainable, almost impossible happiness. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced since early childhood, back when the world still shimmered with magic. She remembered it clearly, the day her parents gave her a real puppy for her birthday. The puppy had been tiny, clumsy, its fur soft like silk. The details had long since blurred with time. She could barely recall the name she'd given him. But that feeling, that pure, soaring happiness, had stayed with her for life. There had been other moments like that, of course, but only a handful. Now, at 28, she could count them on the fingers of one hand. And today, no, yesterday, was one of them. She had felt like a little girl again, handed a gift so beautiful, so unbelievable. She hadn't even dared dream of it. Her beloved, the man of her heart, her everything, now lived with her, brewed coffee in her kitchen. True, the incident at the office yesterday had been anything but joyful. In fact, quite the opposite. Their boss, Violet Darrell, head of the economic news section at the Weekly Business and Leisure, had completely lost her temper and fired Kevin Illings, the best journalist Helen had ever known. "We can't afford to keep someone who systematically ignores editorial assignments," Violet declared coldly. Then, narrowing her mascara-heavy eyes, she added with venomous satisfaction, "Even if he considers himself an unrecognized genius." Kevin had stood up and walked out of her office without a word, his impossibly handsome head held high. He looked magnificent in that moment. As the workday wound down, Helen grabbed her suede jacket and hurried after him. There had never been anything romantic between them, just the occasional lunch together, some shared laughter during staff meetings. Kevin liked Helen, though he had no idea she was secretly in love with him. They wandered the city until late into the evening. Kevin laughed off his firing as though it were nothing. They made up satirical descriptions of that which Viv, giggling like schoolkids. Somehow, Helen couldn't even recall exactly how they ended up at her place. They had dinner, coffee, talked for hours. Then suddenly, Kevin turned quiet. Helen thought maybe he was finally upset about what had happened at work. "You'll land a new job tomorrow," she said passionately. "Any paper would be lucky to have you." But Kevin simply looked at her with his deep gray eyes and gently took her hand. "That's not what I'm thinking about." And then he said it, words she had dreamed of but never expected to hear. Not some cliche like, "Let's spend the night together and see where it goes." No, she had been prepared for that and wouldn't have objected. But what he said was different. It was a confession, tender, genuine, sincere. His voice was low and magnetic as he spoke of her, of the way she tousled her hair with both hands when she was lost in thought, of how the dimple in her left cheek ran deeper than the one on the right when she smiled. He knew even that her Q-tip turned, nose scrunched slightly when she laughed. He called her his golden-eyed girl. And yes, her eyes were amber-hued like melted honey. But a golden eye, isn't that a kind of butterfly? Helen had giggled shyly. "You are my butterfly," he whispered, "with transparent wings. And I'll protect you so you never burn them." He had spoken those words with such seriousness. Then he drew her close. Now, recalling it all in vivid detail, Helen regretted giggling like a silly girl in that moment. Later, she'd asked why he hadn't told her how he felt from the beginning. "What could I have offered you?" he said. "A broke journalist at a third-rate paper. I don't even have a proper place to live. Honestly, I shouldn't have told you even now." He stood and headed for the door. Helen stared after him, stunned. If only she hadn't been so blind, she would have known exactly what to say. She would have made him understand that she didn't want anything but him, that she'd have loved him even if he didn't own a single shirt. She jumped up and clung to him, arms wrapped tightly around him. She knew she looked ridiculous. Her Catholic mother would have been scandalized, would have said she was throwing herself at a man. Helen had been raised in a traditional home, given a conservative upbringing. Even as a grown, independent woman, she carried those values somewhere deep inside. But at that moment, none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was keeping Kevin. She needed him. She needed them. She couldn't even remember what she'd whispered in his ear, pressed against him like that. The words had come out in a rush, broken and urgent. Before Kevin, she'd had a few relationships. None of them ended well. Both times, she'd been the one left behind. It was humiliating, but she had never begged, never clung to those men. Not like this. She had never felt this way about anyone before. She was terrified. What if he pushed her away? What if he left, just like the others? But he hadn't. He pulled her into his arms, lifted her as if she weighed nothing. His strong hands, those same hands she had so often stolen glances at in the office, imagining what they might feel like, gently stroked her trembling back. The thought made her blush even now. She had always lowered her head in those moments, pretending to be focused on work. But now those hands were hers. This man was hers, even if just for the night. She wrapped herself around him, kissed his lips, and moved with him as if their bodies had always known the same rhythm. He whispered that he would never let her go, kissed her so tenderly, as if afraid to hurt her. No one had ever worried about hurting her before. Compared to this, all her past experiences felt crude, hollow. That contrast alone made Helen feel like the luckiest woman alive. For a fleeting second, she wished she weren't quite so happy. Maybe if she saved some of that joy, it would last a little longer. Stretching with pleasure, Helen glanced down at her naked body. She wanted to look like a panther, graceful, alluring, so she could keep seducing this man again and again. Her man. Kevin was hers. The thought was still surreal. She jumped up and dashed to the wardrobe. This morning, she had to look absolutely stunning. She pulled out the robe she had bought for an absurd amount of money. Her mother's words, not hers. She had saved it for just such a moment. She slipped it on like a queen donning her royal mantle. The robe was a masterpiece, weightless pale lilac silk embroidered with shimmering silver thread. It hugged her curves, emphasizing her full bust and slender waist. The hem floated above her rounded knees and shapely calves. She brushed out her thick, golden blonde hair until it flowed down her shoulders. Yes, her hair was beautiful, and her eyes, her golden eyes. She had always hated her nose, a button that turned up at the tip. But Kevin said it was cute. With a final approving glance in the mirror, Helen made her way to the kitchen. Leaning against the doorway, she smiled as she watched Kevin carefully pouring coffee into giant porcelain mugs. She liked drinking tea from mugs that big, something about the abundance. Pretty little coffee cups sat and used nearby. Kevin had clearly chosen the buckets, as Helen called them in her head. Men were so funny. What's so funny? Kevin asked suddenly. Helen jumped. She'd been sure he hadn't noticed her. Stepping into the room, she smiled as he wrapped his arms around her and lifted her off the floor, spinning her as much as their cramped kitchen would allow. They stopped by the window, laughing breathlessly. Kevin stepped back and looked her up and down. Yesterday, he said, I thought it was impossible for anyone to be more beautiful than you. Helen widened her eyes in mock horror. And today I'm certain no one is more beautiful than you in that dress. She burst out laughing. I'll let you in on a dark secret, she whispered. It's not a dress. It's a nightgown. They laughed again and held each other in silence. The coffee's getting cold, Helen murmured. They had breakfast together. It already felt so natural to Helen, this morning coffee in her kitchen, as if they'd always done it, like it was just another day in the life of a married couple. A married couple? Why not? I have to go, she said suddenly. Our prima donna boss will have my head. She rinsed her cup and shoved it into the cupboard. I should get going too, Kevin said. I need to stop by my place. Why? She asked, suddenly nervous. Standing there in her short robe, she looked like a scolded little girl. Kevin smiled and stepped closer. Don't worry, sweetheart, he said, gently stroking her hair. I just need to grab a few things. Mostly my laptop. I've got a book to write, remember? I'll also pick up a newspaper, see what job openings are out there. Helen beamed. Of course, darling. Just promise you'll be home before I am. She gave him a teasing look. Tonight, you'll find out whether I look better in this robe or out of it." Kevin kissed her softly, his eyes laughing. "I'll be counting the minutes," he whispered. Helen dressed in a flash and practically flew out the door. It really did feel like she had wings, delicate and transparent ones.